She vanished in 34 minutes. Halloween morning, Lørenskog, Norway, 2018. A quiet suburb just outside Oslo. A 68-year-old woman calls her son at 9:14 a.m. That was the last that anyone ever heard from her. 34 minutes later, an electrician rang the doorbell. No answer. Her phone was on the table. Her clothes were still in the wardrobe. Her car was in the driveway. She was gone. Her name was Elisabeth Hagen. She had been married to one of Norway's richest men for nearly 50 years. And when her husband came home that afternoon and found the house empty, he spent 30 to 40 minutes searching before calling the police. After first spending time reading a 5-page ransom note that had been left on a chair in the hallway. That note demanded 9 million euros in an untraceable cryptocurrency called Monero. It warned Tom Hagen not to contact police or media. He called the police 30 minutes later. What followed was 7 years of investigation, a dramatic arrest, a full legal exoneration, and, as of today, 0 answers. Elisabeth has never been found. No body, no trace, no conviction. But the absence of a conviction is not the same thing as the absence of a culprit. And when you look at this case carefully, really look at it, one explanation keeps rising above the rest. Who were these people? Tom Hagen and Elisabeth Falkovik met at a folk high school in Brandbu in 1968. He was 18, she was 19. They married the following year. By the time she disappeared, they had been together for half a century. 3 children, several grandchildren, and a fortune that had grown from nothing into approximately 1.7 billion Norwegian kroner. Tom built his fortune on electricity trading and property development, enough to rank him among Norway's 200 richest people. Despite all of this, the couple lived with almost aggressive modesty. They had occupied the same detached house at Slåreveien 4 in Fjellhamar since the early 1980s, a quiet residential street bordering a lake about 15 kilometers east of Oslo. No gates, no security cameras. Elisabeth, friends said, often left the doors unlocked. She is described consistently as warm, funny, unpretentious. Full of laughter, said her closest friend. Totally uninterested in money. She sat on some of Tom's company boards, but was primarily a homemaker. She was 68 years old when she vanished. The marriage, though, that's where things get complicated. A marriage under strain. 50 years is a long time to be with anyone. Tom Hagen acknowledged in police interviews that the marriage had been turbulent. His personal notebooks, seized during the investigation, showed he had divided the marriage into distinct time periods and described the era from the early 1990s through 2018 as difficult. Friends of Elisabeth told police she seemed emotionally broken down in the weeks before her disappearance, and that she appeared to be facing a difficult decision in the marriage. Police found she had searched for the Norwegian word for divorce on a Mac computer in the house. She had joined a Facebook group about rental housing, interpreted as possible research into finding a new place to live. A signed separation document from 2012 was reportedly found in the home. And then there was the prenuptial agreement. Tom Hagen had secured 2 prenuptial agreements that declared virtually all of his business empire as his separate property, and reclassified the family home itself as his alone. Under their terms, if Elisabeth filed for divorce, she would walk away with almost nothing. Multiple lawyers who reviewed those agreements said a court would almost certainly have struck them down as unconscionably one-sided. Elisabeth could have been entitled to several 100 million kroner in a divorce. October 31st, 2018, 34 minutes. The evening before, Tom and Elisabeth went to a theatre performance with friends. They were back home before midnight. The next morning, Halloween, Tom left for his office at the Futurum Business Park around 9 a.m., about an hour later than usual. He would later attribute this to the late night. Surveillance cameras at Futurum confirmed his arrival at approximately 9:15 a.m. At 9:14 a.m., Elisabeth was on the phone with her son. This is the last confirmed sign of life. At 9:48 a.m., an electrician named Tommy Scanson arrived at the house to do some scheduled work. He rang the bell. No answer. He called Anne Elisabeth's phone. No answer. 34 minutes. Tom Hagen called his wife's phone 8 times throughout that morning. At approximately 1:30 in the afternoon, 3.5 hours before his usual return time, he drove home, telling police he feared she'd had a medical emergency. What he found inside: her phone on the living room table, bloodstains, drag marks in the bathroom, a plastic cable tie, a roll of silver grey tape near the safe by the front door, and no sign of forced entry. On a chair in the hallway, an envelope. Inside, a 5-page typed ransom note. The note. The letter opened in broken Norwegian sprinkled with English and Swedish words. Ransom note, October 31st, 2018. It demanded €9 million payable exclusively in Monero, a privacy cryptocurrency whose transactions are, for practical purposes, untraceable. It contained a link to a document with instructions, a Bitcoin address for coded communication, 12 specific amounts corresponding to 12 pre-agreed messages, and a Monero wallet for the actual payment. The infrastructure behind this scheme was elaborate. Accounts on 3 major cryptocurrency exchanges had been created using a stolen identity. Ola Henrik Golf, purchased on the dark web. The document the note linked to had been created on June 28, 2018, 4 months before the disappearance. Planning had been underway since at least summer, but investigators would eventually notice something odd about the letter itself. It was written in broken Norwegian, the kind a foreigner might produce, except when linguists looked closely, the errors weren't consistent. They didn't follow a pattern. A genuine second language speaker makes the same mistakes repeatedly. These errors shifted. They were selective. Professor Aneta Pavlenko of the University of Oslo, one of the world's leading forensic linguists, who had consulted on the Boston Marathon bombing case, put it plainly. If you make real errors when writing, you make the same errors every time. You can see a pattern. If an error is not consistent, it can be exposed as fabricated. Professor Aneta Pavlenko, University of Oslo. Police ultimately concluded the letter was most likely authored by one or more persons with Norwegian as a first language, or who for other reasons possess good Norwegian skills. The second language features are assumed to be affected or intentional. There was something else in the note that stood out to investigators. Buried in the instructions was this sentence: "If you follow instructions, when you get your wife back, you can, of course, contact police. It is only justice. Real kidnappers don't invite contact with police after payment. They don't invoke justice." The sentence doesn't read like a threat. It reads like a writer who forgot, for a moment, that they were supposed to be a criminal. 10 weeks in secret. The note explicitly threatened Anne Elisabeth's life if police or media were contacted. Based on this, investigators made an extraordinary decision. The entire case would be kept secret for 10 weeks. Officers worked in civilian clothes. Their cars had false license plates. Neighbors were interviewed under false pretenses. The house could not be cordoned off for a proper forensic examination. The alleged kidnappers made sporadic contact throughout encrypted channels. Coded messages were exchanged. No proof of life was ever provided, not even in December 2018, when the counterparty stated clearly Anne Elisabeth was alive but sent nothing to back it up. On January 9, 2019, police and the Hagen family decided the secret investigation had run its course. Police Inspector Tommy Brask held a press conference. "Our main theory is that the victim was kidnapped by unidentified perpetrators at her home. We have no proof she is alive, but we haven't received any indication that she isn't alive either." Tommy Brask, January 2019. 26,000 tips poured in from the public. None of them resolved the case. Payment, then silence. In June 2019, 8 months after the disappearance, police formally changed their hypothesis. They no longer believed it was a genuine kidnapping. They now believed Anne Elisabeth was dead. The reasons? No proof of life, despite repeated requests, an ill-suited communication platform, minimal interest in collecting the ransom, and the sheer amount of time that had passed. Then, in July 2019, new contact arrived from a previously unused channel. The counterparty said Elisabeth was alive, again without evidence, and demanded partial payment. Tom Hagen, at the direction of police, transferred approximately 1.35 million euros in Monero. Over €1 million gone. And then, nothing. All contact ceased permanently. The remaining 7.65 million euros was never collected. She was genuinely kidnapped by an unknown third party. This was the police's official hypothesis for the first 8 months. The argument for it: the cryptocurrency infrastructure was sophisticated, requiring real technical knowledge. The ransom scheme was planned months in advance. The pasted.co document was created in June 2018, and there were unexplained figures. A grey van observed near the Hagen home on the morning of the disappearance that was never traced. Surveillance footage of what appeared to be someone in dark clothing observing Tom Hagen's movements in the days before. Proponents of this theory think that an organized criminal group targeted one of Norway's wealthiest men, knowing the police would be hampered by operating in secret, and knowing Monero would make the ransom uncollectible by authorities. The problems with this theory are significant. No genuine kidnapping for ransom in Norway has ever been recorded. It's essentially unheard of in this country. And there is one question this theory has never been able to answer. If Elisabeth was alive, why did the kidnappers never once provide proof of it? A photograph, a dated newspaper, an audio clip. It would have taken 5 minutes and unlocked 9 million euros. They never did it. Not once across 7 months of intermittent contact. Perhaps most damningly, the letter's language. If you go to the effort of building a sophisticated crypto infrastructure over months, you don't then write a ransom letter so linguistically implausible that forensic experts can identify the errors as deliberately faked within weeks. That's not the work of a sophisticated criminal ring. That's a mistake. An organized criminal group exploited inside knowledge. A variation on the kidnapping theory explored in the Netflix dramatization What If Organized Criminals with knowledge of Tom Hagen's wealth arranged the abduction with no connection to Tom himself? Police pursued this seriously. A Vestfold criminal gang, an informant who died in prison before he could be fully questioned, Italian and Spanish organized crime connections, dark web threads traced internationally. None of it produced a suspect. And this theory, like straightforward kidnapping, runs into the same wall. No proof of life. Ever. Criminal organizations capable of planning a sophisticated cryptocurrency extortion over months don't abandon 7.5 million euros and go permanently silent, unless there was never a living hostage to use as leverage. Let's talk about what we actually know, stripped of everything that was never established. We know Elisabeth was alive at 9:14 a.m. We know Tom Hagen left the house around 9 a.m. Cameras at his workplace logged his arrival at approximately 9:15. We know an electrician got no answer at 9:48. We know blood, drag marks, and staging materials were inside the house. We know a ransom note was on a chair in the hallway. And we know that for the next 7 years, no genuine kidnapper ever collected their ransom, no genuine hostage was ever returned, and no body was ever found. Now here's the question the kidnapping theory has always struggled to answer. Why didn't they provide proof of life? If Elisabeth was alive, proof of life was the only thing standing between the kidnappers and 9 million euros. It would have taken 5 minutes. The theories section raised that question and left it open. Here's the answer. They never provided it because there was no living person to photograph. Not a tactical decision, an impossibility. And if Elisabeth was already dead before the first communication with the kidnappers took place, if she was dead before the ransom note was ever opened, then the kidnapping was never real. It was theater. So who wrote the script? Tom Hagen's name sat at the top of this investigation for years, for reasons that go beyond circumstantial proximity. As we've seen, the prenuptial agreement lawyers described as unconscionably one-sided, the divorce research on her computer, the notebooks documenting a troubled marriage, and his own awareness of what a split would cost him financially. The blood evidence in the house, and a ransom scheme planned months in advance, the infrastructure we walked through in the timeline, that was, from the beginning, almost certainly never going to be collected. That last point is worth sitting with. As we've seen, experts called the €9 million Monero demand unrealistic, roughly 10% of the coin's entire daily trading volume. And yet whoever built this scheme spent months on it. The pasted.co document, the stolen identities, the coded Bitcoin messaging, the Tor routing. That level of preparation is not the work of someone who expects to collect money. It's the work of someone who needs the investigation to look like a kidnapping. The linguists who analyzed the note found deliberate, inconsistent language errors, faked foreign grammar by someone who speaks native Norwegian. The note invited Tom Hagen to contact police after payment. It is only justice. An absurd line for a genuine criminal to include. And police's own review concluded the communication platform used for the supposed negotiations was poorly suited for genuine ransom negotiations, as if chosen by someone who knew they'd never have to actually use it. Now for the exoneration. On October 18, 2024, Norway's Director of Public Prosecutions formally cleared Tom Hagen using Henleggingslegoda 103, the strongest dismissal code in the Norwegian legal system, meaning it was not merely that there was insufficient evidence to convict, but that the evidence, with particular strength, indicated no criminal act was committed by him. His defense attorney called it a total acquittal. We have to be honest about what that means and what it doesn't. The case against Tom Hagen collapsed for two reasons. First, camera footage at his workplace appears to confirm he was at Futurum at approximately 9:15 a.m., within the 34-minute window. If the attack happened between 9:14 and 9:48, and if he arrived at his office by 9:15, the math is tight enough to create reasonable doubt. Second, the police's own investigation was badly compromised. Hundreds of classified documents were leaked to journalists. Evidence was misrepresented. The deleted phone calls that were cited as suspicious turned out to be automatically overwritten by the phone's own memory limitations, something police's own internal reports had documented months before the arrest. The investigation's integrity was, in the words of one legal expert, severely damaged. But here is the critical distinction. An investigation that was leaked to death, that had its evidence manhandled, that made mistakes in custody applications and failed to secure a prosecution. That tells us something about the police, not necessarily about Tom Hagen. The Riksadvokatens dismissal reflects the state of the evidence gathered by a compromised investigation. It does not constitute a finding that the kidnapping was real. It does not explain where Anne Elisabeth is. And it does not account for the fact that no one, in 7 years, has offered a coherent explanation for who else would have built that ransom scheme, let it play out for months without proof of life, collected a fraction of the demand, and then vanished. The defense always pointed to Tom Hagen's lack of digital expertise as proof he couldn't have orchestrated the crypto scheme. It's a reasonable argument, but it's also incomplete. The scheme didn't require Tom Hagen to understand how Monero works. It required someone, perhaps an associate, an IT contractor, someone known to him, to set the infrastructure up. The prosecution's second suspect, the man they called Crypto Manon, was identified precisely because he had that expertise and had had contact with Tom Hagen before the disappearance. He was ultimately cleared too. But his existence in the investigation tells you something. Police always believed the crypto scheme could have been outsourced. What most likely happened to Anne Elisabeth Hagen is this. She died in her home on the morning of October 31st, 2018, as a consequence of violence. Violence connected to the collapse of her marriage and the enormous financial stakes of a divorce. Her body was removed from the property. The scene was staged with materials that had been prepared in advance. And an elaborate digital scheme, built over months by someone with technical knowledge, whether Tom Hagen alone or with assistance, was deployed to direct the investigation toward an imaginary kidnapping. The investigation that followed was severely compromised by leaks, by mishandled evidence, by a custody application that the courts rejected as inadequately supported. Tom Hagen walked free, legally cleared, and in Norwegian law, that matters enormously. But the exoneration is a judgment on the investigation. It is not an answer to the question of what happened to Anne Elisabeth. She has been missing for more than 7 years. No body, no ransom collected, no living hostage returned, no proof of life, ever. Just a house, a 34-minute window, and a ransom note written by a native Norwegian speaker, trying, and ultimately failing, to sound like a foreigner. Somebody knows where Anne Elisabeth Hagen is, and someone knows exactly why the kidnappers never had anything to prove she was alive. What do you guys think? Does the exoneration change your read on this, or is it just the investigation that fell apart? Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where your heads are at. This case is unlike any other kidnapping in Scandinavian history. What's a case from your country or your region where the official narrative never quite added up? Let us know below. Always interesting to see what people have been sitting with. Do you want to bring bad things with you wherever you go? Our episodes are now available as a podcast. Look us up on your favorite podcast app and listen to the most truth-seeking true crime podcast out there.